speaking of sort of shock, because at the very top of the episode I mentioned, like, when it comes to communal experiences, laughter, humor, suspense are definitely uniting forces in that. I think the other one is shock, which your pick had, and I think my pick also has a boatload of it, but in a very different way, which is The Master from 2012. The logline of the movie is: a naval veteran arrives home from war, unsettled and uncertain of his future, until he is tantalized by the cause, capital C, and its charismatic leader. Directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, a whole bunch of other great people. So I put this movie on here because, look, you know, Alex, that I have walked out of many, many movies. And usually it's because I'm bored, and it's what I call the restroom test. Meaning, if I had to go somewhere in the middle of the three-fourth, third act of the movie to go to the restroom, and if I don't sort of want to go back in, I don't go back in, because it means that the movie has sort of lost me. And maybe this is not a great thing to say on a movie podcast, because it's probably sacrilegious to like leave a movie. But I say this because this is a movie that I did not leave, spoiler alert, for it failing the bathroom test, but because I just couldn't be in this space for any longer, for how much it shook me and how much it affected me. So I watched this, I want to say, the first month of its coming out, at the ArcLight, our favorite place in LA. This was the time when I lived in LA. I actually didn't have that much background on PTA. I'd watched Boogie Nights. And again, like I said, I'm not ahead of anybody. So there are a bunch of PTA heads and such all around me. I could sense it. And I was like, what is happening? This is like a convention, or, you know, a cult in a cult. But again, but I was looking forward to it, definitely. And I kept watching it until the scene in the jail when Joaquin Phoenix is literally hurling his body to the railings of the jail and such. And that's when I was like, I don't think I can take this anymore. And I left. And for years, I did not come back to this movie, didn't want to interrogate my thoughts or my feelings towards it. I don't think I've had an experience in the movie theaters of this kind, which was so jolting that I couldn't even be in the same space. So yes, transportive, but in a very different kind of way, where I just felt like I was alone in a sea of people and just couldn't take it anymore, even though it was in a packed house. So since then, I watched the movie a few times, and I've interrogated why this happened and why this is so memorable for me. For this reason is because many things, I think. So on the thematic level, I think this movie does such an amazing job of playing with loneliness, you being really troubled, forming a friendship, but then this friendship also being a bit of a toxic sort of relationship, because in order for it to work, it has to keep the cause, which is the cult, going. So the two people almost cannot escape their traumas and their fears, because if that happens, everything else breaks. And I think it hit me at a time when I was fairly new in LA. Loneliness was definitely a big topic on my mind. I was making new friends. And I think there's something about those themes kind of really hitting me at a time, at a place, which, not that I was expecting this to happen to me, but it sort of just touched me and pushed my buttons in such a way that I just couldn't contain it, couldn't contain myself in my seat, literally. And then it's further layered by probably some of the most brilliant performances in the last 20 years or so that I can think of, where Joaquin Phoenix gives just like contorted ghost performance. His body is sort of convoluted and so odd. And you look at his face, and his face looks like he's carrying all the pain and the ghost that he's seen on his face. And even before he meets Joaquin Phoenix, like the scenes on the ship or the scenes in the department store where he's working, it's just heartbreaking, unbelievable. Like that in itself is very unsettling to watch. And then you meet Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's on the surface majestic and confident and alluring and attractive and such, but also if you look into his eyes, he's a hollow, fearful man, because maybe somewhere deep down he knows what he's prescribing is bullshit, or maybe the movement so far has worked and now it's becoming bigger, almost a religion, and people are expecting for answers and he ain't got any. So maybe it's just fear of, what am I going to tell them? They're going to find out. And then you have Amy Adams, who's sort of this still character in the back, who's sort of controlling in many ways the cause. Like if you remove her, probably Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix run away to some other city and start fresh, So she is sort of this still agent of chaos, which again is just, each of these people are so unsettling in their own way. And then talk about the mise-en-scène and the departments all coming together, from the brilliant cinematography. You literally feel like you are in post-World War II times. Just the color, Johnny Greenwood's amazing score that sort of permeates, it creates this unsettling yet alluring ambiance. I don't know, what can I say? It's sort of movie making at its finest in many ways, to the point that it's so dense that you need to come back to it several times if you have the stomach for it to even pass it. And again, going back to, would I have had a similar reaction had I watched this at home? Probably not. I think it is about watching movies on the big screen with a bunch of people that sort of shock you and stir you in that way, where you can't even sit in the theater. This can only happen on the big screen, I think. I don't think this would have happened if I'd watched it at home. And selfishly, I also wanted to put like an adult drama over here and sort of prove the point that, this is an event movie. To me, Licorice Pizza this year was an event movie because of its legacy and such. But it doesn't have to be IP. It doesn't have to be all hunky-dory, bunch of people having fun. It can be something serious and transgressive and transportive, and yet be worthy of watching on the big screen when done right. So that's number one for me, The Master, the movie I didn't finish.
I've actually never walked out of a movie before. So it's just interesting. That this movie left that much of an impression on you in the theater that it was just something that you couldn't take anymore. But it is interesting that in terms of if you had seen that at home, like at home, there are distractions. It's easier for you. You can kind of get up whenever you want. Maybe you pause and maybe you don't. Kind of come back to it. It's easy to kind of detach yourself from that world. So perhaps the intensity of the intense feeling of loneliness and all the horrible things that were going on in Joaquin's head, and then also through his performance, in terms of it definitely being hard to watch, wouldn't have hit you as much, probably, I think, because you could kind of not be in it 100% all the time. Whereas in a movie, you really do have that, your attention is 100% on that. So it can affect you a lot more. And this clearly did have an effect. So I had seen this in theaters as well at the ArcLight as well when it came out.
Maybe we were sitting in the same theater.
Maybe. And I was like, why is that guy getting up? Hopefully he's coming back. I am not a huge P.T. Anderson fan. I can respect his movies, but I haven't loved a lot of them. And I do, though, think it's very interesting. Like his filmography and his artistic point of view definitely seems to be a lot about California, in the same way you can maybe categorize Woody Allen or Scorsese as like, oh, they, write about New York City and that's sort of in their movies, whether it's set in New York or not, there's that feeling in it. I definitely feel like P.T. Anderson's consistently commenting on California and the culture that we have here and the differences in our society. And this movie definitely I do think speaks a lot to that shallowness, I guess. It's like everyone is like, and even Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, like, yeah, he's nice, but like he's very surface level, because you're right, he doesn't actually have answers. But because in California, I feel like people can, you can kind of form these looser, less deep connections. It allows for people then to be able to create these religions that kind of, once you start poking at it a little bit, then it falls apart, but no one really pokes at it because that's sort of the way that, the culture sometimes is here in California. And there definitely is that sense of loneliness then, where you're feeling like you're not really making connections. You can't really fit in, even though there's people all around you and, you know, everyone's really nice and really friendly. And I think that's a lot of what Joaquin's character, you know, obviously he has that PTSD that he's dealing with as well from the war, but he's able to survive in California, I feel, where he wouldn't maybe be able to do that in other places. So it's interesting that, you know, you being freshly moved to LA, when you saw it too, and kind of having those same kind of feelings of you know, I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like loneliness, a little bit of isolation or something. And maybe that the focus in on that in this movie really affected you because it was that time.
It's funny, I didn't actually put the California connection in my head, but that's so true. I mean, they literally show Pasadena. I didn't live that far from there. I lived on the border of Glendale, Pasadena when I moved to LA. So yeah, go figure.
Yeah. My main reaction to this movie when I saw it was a little more like disappointment in the fact that, because it was 70 millimeter release, like he shot it on 65, and it was like that. I was like, oh my gosh, like, you know, this is going to be very visual. Obviously the film made before that, There Will Be Blood, it was just, I think his best film, and one that just is like amazing to see, like just the scope of it. And this movie was just so much, like so many close-ups and so much more about portraiture. It was, and it was like what was in the frame and how he arranged it was more what he was focusing on, which disappointed me, because like my expectations were like, oh, coming off of There Will Be Blood and it's 70 millimeter, what is this going to look like? And it was all in like, you know, small confined spaces, which again, I think was what he was trying to say. I mean, he used his visual style, I think, fit the narrative and the themes he was talking about. But to me, as someone who was coming in there, not a huge P.T. Anderson fan necessarily, and expecting some very cinematic, quote unquote, from like a visual perspective film, and I just remember walking out being like, that was disappointing in that respect. And then also because the characters, like you were saying too, are so odd and like off-putting on purpose, they are, but that was just helped me or made it harder for me to be interested in what was going on. But I've seen the film since then and definitely can grow to appreciate it a lot more, but it's still not, it doesn't like touch or speak to me. And I think that's just an issue I have with most of his films. Like I'm not able to like reach some deeper connection with them. Some of them definitely, Licorice Pizza and There Will Be Blood and Punch Drunk Love, but the rest of his filmography, I still find a little elusive. Maybe someday I'll be in the right headspace to all of a sudden have an epiphany moment on Inherent Vice or something, but we'll see.
Yeah, I doubt about that one.
You never know.
You never know. But yeah, this one, I think it was very elusive to me for a while. And I think I've started to grasp it more than I could potentially earlier. And in interesting ways, look back at my own life, you know, as well, and trace it as I watch the movie over and over again. So in some ways, it actually does feel emotional and personal now. But it's interesting what you say, that on first brush and even second brush, it doesn't feel emotional at all. It's very hard to grasp. And maybe that's why he's such an interesting filmmaker, perhaps. And I guess the 70 millimeter stuff, like, to be honest, this was pretty early in my sort of film immersion, if you will. I didn't even really understand the difference between that versus not 70 millimeter. But what it did do was this, you know, creation of claustrophobia in these confined places where, yeah, you're watching the main action, but then Amy Adams is sitting in the corner at the end doing stuff with her eyes and her face, and it's adding to the simmering quality of unsettlement. And then I finally walk out. I don't think that happens if it's not done the way it's done. It's not just the characters, it is the cinematography, the 70
Mhm.
millimeter of it all, the score, it all is kind of layered up. But it's a weird one for sure.
Mhm.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.